Greetings and welcome to the upper engine mount replacement video, 2001 Mazda MPV. This process should work for any model year 2000 to 2006 MPV though. The issue we have is too much movement of the engine and transmission assembly within the engine compartment. With it in drive and in reverse, you can see the amount that it's moving under the hood. That's the concern we want to try to clear up. Now, I recorded each of the engine mount replacements on separate days, separate times, so that accounts for the difference in camera angle and that kind of thing. Just bear with that. Hopefully you'll find this video helpful. And of course, any questions, go ahead and put them there in the comments. Let's see how much the engine was moving. This motor mount right here bolts into the steel there, back there, and there's one over here to the side, right there. The deal is it's completely torn up in the middle. So we're going to take loose these 4 bolts here, actually nuts here, and then we'll take loose right there. We'll have to take this mount that holds this power steering line in place, and we'll be able to take the mount out and drop a new one in. First thing we have to do though is support the engine, because if we don't, then when we take these 4 bolts out, the engine is going to want to drop, and we don't want that. We want the engine to stay in place. To properly support our engine, we're going to use our floor jack with a 2x4. Where are we going to support it? Let's get a little light up here. We're going to support it across the oil pan and that cross member. We're not jacking the engine up, we're simply supporting it to keep it from moving. Alright, so there's our engine supported by our floor jack with our 2x4 sitting between it and the oil pan. That helps to distribute the load. Should help to keep there from being any damage. Please don't jack directly against your oil pan, especially an aluminum oil pan. It's very easy to crack. You don't want that mess on your hands. First nut I'm going to take loose is this one right here, and that uses a 17mm socket. I'm putting an extension on it. We're going to go ahead and remove that one first. That one, the stud actually sticks out of the top of the mount, so that one, when we take it loose, I don't really expect anything to shift. After that, we'll move on to this one right here that holds this power steering line in place. Then the ignition cables, spark plug cables actually, are right here, and I'm going to snap them off, and then we'll be able to take these nuts loose that are down here. There's 4 of them, and they look to be about the same size as 17mm. So here we go. Almost had to use a breaker bar on that. So there's the nut we took out. And you want to save that piece there too. Alright, the nut that's holding on the power steering line here is actually a 10mm, so I'm going to use my 10mm to take it loose. That was quite a bit easier to turn than the last one was. I want to bring that to your attention. If you look underneath that nut, you can see that there's a cable leading off it. That's one of your engine grounds. That's keeping your electrical system working the way that it's supposed to. So, that, you got to make sure that goes back on when you put the whole works back together. So when we remove the bolt nut, we're just going to pull it off to the side and keep it out of the way. As I mentioned, I'm going to take the spark plug wires off, the little plastic holder that holds the spark plug wires, I mean. I'm going to set them off to the side where they won't be in the way. Then I'm going to just check and confirm that that is, yeah, that's a 17 millimeter. And so hopefully, start loosening. What we should be able to do now is remove this whole piece. Actually, I'm going to finish taking this big one off that I had previously broken loose. There we go. So the bracket comes off now. The engine's a little bit warm, so the bracket's a little bit warm too. There's the bracket. That's not a piece we're replacing, that's just a piece that we are reusing. The mount itself, we can get a good view of it now. That's what our mount looks like by itself. And what we're going to find is, of course, is that the bolt sticking up out of there is just moving all over the place. It's not being still like it should. But to get the rest of the way there, we're going to have to take loose the rest of the bolts that are holding the mount to the engine, or to the frame of the car, rather. That was pretty tight one there. Had to put a little. So right here are our various parts. These two bolts and one nut, those were holding the mount to the frame of the car. And then these four, these were the ones holding, actually, that one, the stud came off. Those four were holding the bracket, this bracket, onto the engine right here. And this last guy was one that I had forgotten about. That one was one that was actually bolted onto the top of the mount. So now we're going to take the mount out. And let's give it a good look in comparison to our new mount. Here's our new one. And, the way that the engine mount works, most people know this, is that the stud which bolts to the bracket that's bolted to the engine is in a rubber surround. The mount itself, this is what bolts to the frame of the vehicle. And the idea is that that rubber absorbs all kinds of vibration and that kind of thing. Makes the car much more pleasant to be sitting in. Of course, with anything rubber over time, especially these hydraulic mounts, you know, that rubber gets torn. This mount actually has hydraulic fluid in it, which, you know, I believe is all leaked out some time ago. And if you just look at the ease with which I can move these parts, like, you know, I can push really hard and I can get a little bit of movement out of that stud. On this one, it's just flopping around. Turns left to right, which shouldn't be happening at all. What this is going to do is this is going to reduce the amount of movement of the engine in the engine compartment under the hood. I'm going to try to give you a little bit better view of where we're working down here. You can see the holes that we're bolting into there. So with that, we'll take our new mount and slip it into position. I wish I had a good place to put the light where it would continue to throw light on our work area. Of course, you want to be gentle when we're putting it in between various hoses, lines, parts of the AC and power steering system. Gentleness is key there. So we're going to set that in place to where all of our holes are lined up. We're in position now, and now we just start putting things back together. All right. There is our engine bracket. We're going to put it back in place. I'm going to try to put a little light on it for you. And I'm not going to be successful either. Doggone it. I have to get one of those underhood light things from Harbor Freight. Alright, anyway. Put this bracket in by going behind my radiator hose and position it just like that. Bring it down over the studs, all of them, just like that. One of the things that becomes evident here is how much the engine had dropped due to the mount being blown out. So I'm going to jack the engine up slightly more. So since these two bolts are deeper in, I'm going to start by threading them on.
I'm going to give you light.
All right. So I'm going to start turning that one in first.
Do you have another flashlight?
Do what now?
Do you have a
Next up, we're going to go ahead and replace the driver's side mount as well. This is it. This one actually bolts to the transmission, I believe, and its location is underneath the airbox. So I'm going to be taking the battery and its bracket off, disconnecting the battery terminals, removing the tray that the battery sits in, and then I will see what the accessibility is like, and I'm going to have to actually take the airbox off as well. So with the battery and its tray out, we now have a good view of the mount that we wish to replace right here. And it looks like we are going to have to get the air box out in order to have good access to that. So that means, let's see, this bolt here, mass airflow sensor, another sensor that's back here will have to be disconnected, and I'll have to take the 4 bolts out that are connecting the air box to the intake hose. That'll be what we'll do next. Access to the mount. We got the air box completely out of here. That's the cold air intake. And you can see this is a very slightly different model mount. It has this bumper, this insulator on top, compared with this one. But the holes all look to be in the same places. So, and the parts manual says that it is a fit. So next up, with the engine supported, we're going to start taking bolts out. Start with this one right here, and then once that's free, take these 2 out. The bracket that holds the battery tray out to give me better access to that bolt right there. That's a let's see, that's a 17 millimeter bolt right there that we're going to turn and free this. Took a little while to get the bolt out. It's a very long bolt. Once I broke it loose, there was the nut that it goes into that was on the back side here, which I caught. This is what it looks like. And anyway, I ended up having to put a jack underneath the transmission pan also, with a board under it to support it just a bit, to get the tension off the bolt so that I could slide it out the rest of the way. Next up, take these 2 bolts out, and they'll be ready to put the new mount in place. With a 14 millimeter socket on here on the end of the ratchet and an extension, we take the mount loose. It's going to require both hands. The last thing we're going to do is get this little wiring harness out of here, and I think I'm going to need to use a flat screwdriver to do that without. Never be simple. There's very little clearance between this bolt and the transmission bracket there, so I had to use an open end wrench on this one. Actually, I used the box end and pushed against the open end to break it loose, and as you can see now, we're just turning it out the rest of the way. The back one I don't anticipate being nearly as difficult. End up having to use the open end wrench on the back one, but now the mount is free and we're ready to put the new one in. Let's take a good look at this old one. It actually feels in pretty good shape. Rubber looks to be in decent shape. I'm replacing it at the advice of a mechanic who says that the torque steer I'm experiencing is a result of worn engine mounts. Could very well be that I have to end up replacing the lower rear one in order to resolve that problem. The new mount is just the reverse of the removal of the old one. You can see I've already started the bolts. I'll just be tightening them up nicely in their holes, and then next up will be the bolt that goes through the middle of the mount right there. Long bolt in. I did have to jack up against the transmission pan just a tiny bit more to get the hole in the mount to line up with the hole in the bracket. Did that very cautiously. As I said earlier,
piece of wood between the jack and the bottom of the pan to try to evenly distribute the weight so that I don't dent my pan or crack it or anything like that. At this point, the job is basically finished. I'm going to just do a final tightening on all the bolts involved. Then back will go the battery tray, the battery tray bracket, the tray and the battery, and I'll be ready to test it out. Of course, the airbox has to go back on as well. Our final step now is going to be to start it up and see how much it moves under the hood when we put it in either drive or reverse. See how much movement we get. We still get a lot of movement. We'll have to get that last engine mount, the one at the rear on the bottom, done. And that one will be one that I'll probably have to pay a technician to do. Let's see what happens.